My name is Pamela Carroll. I go by Sissy because I'm Southern. I'm the Dean of the College of Education and Human Performance at University of Central Florida. Quick quiz, just to refresh, give you a little freshening now in the middle of the morning. How many of you know where University of Central Florida is?
Oh my gosh.
See? It's in Orlando, Florida. It is, by most counts, the second largest university in the United States of America, second to Arizona State University. And I have to say right off the bat, if flattery is imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, then consider yourself flattered, because UCF takes a lot of cues from our colleagues at Arizona State University in the way we go about doing things. Our university is only 51 years old and has grown from an humble beginning in 50 years ago of 1,900 students to now 64,000 and change on our main campus in Orlando, and about 11 regional campuses. So the exciting thing about what we're doing, or some of the exciting things about what we're doing in at the University of Central Florida, involve our partnerships. We're called the Partnership University, and our president, John Hitt, is very insistent that we build on partnerships. What we represent today is way down there, Ryan Goodwin is the director of our Office of Higher Education Innovation.
Yes.
Dr. Goodwin will talk about that in a few minutes. Dr. Joyce Romano is a vice president for educational partnerships at Valencia College, one of our strongest partners, a college with 70,000 students and seven branch campuses in the area. Great partners for us. Dr. Bridget Williams is the chief of staff of the Orange County Public Schools, which has 200,000 students, serves 200,000 students, the 10th largest school district in the nation, and an incredible resource, particularly, I feel like, for the College of Education and Human Performance, but which does work with all of our colleges on campus. And Dr. Paula Kohler is the executive director of the newly formed, through the Florida legislature, Florida Center for Students with Unique Abilities, which she can explain in just a few minutes. So when we were talking with the folks in this assembly about what we're up to, really what it comes down to is how we use, in UCF's terms, scale times excellence to equal impact. And we really are able to wrestle together resources from across the Orange County Public Schools, Valencia College, into UCF, and then back into the community. More than 80% of the students at UCF come from the immediate area, the surrounding area. We are just on the verge of becoming an Hispanic-serving institution. We're about 24% Hispanic right now. The number of Hispanic students who come to UCF and who then graduate from UCF in the last 10 years has increased by 134% because of a program called Direct Connect, which is a program that involves 13 state colleges, including Valencia College and its several campuses, by which the university's administration and the state colleges' administrations agreed on a plan that allows direct access to the university from the state colleges for students who matriculate, who go through the state colleges. They are guaranteed access into UCF. And we work very closely, in fact, have done some re-articulating of plans so that students can move seamlessly from the state colleges, many of which were formerly community colleges, into the university through sitting down with advisors to make sure that not just an English course is listed, but the right English course for a particular major, et cetera, so that the advisors know each other on the different campuses. They know their counterparts for the students' advantage. And Joyce can talk about the kinds of data systems we use to make sure those things are in place. What we have done just in the past couple of years is reach back further to make sure that we are working with the public schools to attract, to recruit students beginning in middle school, to bring them into the Valencia pipeline, then into the UCF pipeline, and then back into the community for meaningful jobs to support families, for working to make livable wages back into the pipeline. Particularly important for me in terms of teaching positions, but I'll let them talk about those particular activities. Joyce, why don't you start?
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Sissy. So, yeah, Direct Connect was really a game changer for our area, and it's really a great testament to the university's commitment to access in our local area, because as they were growing in their prestige, of course, there was an increase in the selected admissions, and so we all noticed through data, and that's a theme. Like, there's some themes that we're all hearing, right? So data is a very powerful part of it. And one of the pieces is that in terms of our local access, our students weren't getting in as freshmen. And frankly, there was an attitude in our area that, well, anybody could go to UCF, but it wasn't true. And so this was back about 11 years ago when we created the Direct Connect to UCF. And it was really a partnership between our two college presidents, Dr. John Hitt and Dr. Sandy Shugart, who's my president. Both really brilliant men who are devoted to access and educational lift and social justice issues. So that was a big part of the leadership part of it. But so really some of the data we've now been in this partnership for 11 years has been, and another theme as Tim mentioned, and was also mentioned in California, is this idea of system design. And Arizona State's done an awful lot of that too. So I just want to pull out, the advantage of being like fourth in the lineup is you can start to pull out some of the themes. So I just wanted to try to do that for us. And definitely this idea of thinking as scale and thinking of a whole system and what would it look like if, and really us taking ownership. I love the way Tim says it, like what are we doing, like institutions behaving badly instead of students behaving badly, and how do we realign ourselves and reimagine ourselves. So we've done a lot of that as well. Another thing we've done is to understand each other's accountability measures. So I'm sure Florida is the only state in the union that has perverse incentives for education, right? Yeah, I thought so, right, yeah. So, really just understanding each other's accountability measures and how we can help each other succeed is very important, and just really looking into that and understanding we're in the process now of actually planning to open a joint downtown campus between Valencia and UCF, and Orange County Public Schools is opening a new K-8 school in the exact same geographical area. So it's just like an unprecedented opportunity to really plan, again, for this idea of ecosystem. So that's another theme that we're hearing. So data, accountability, alignment, system design, and ecosystem. So that's words that we're using very intentionally. And so I'll end with that. Because I'm leading now the integration of a database, the creation of a database we're calling the Central Florida Educational Ecosystem Database, in which we'll align the data from our Orange schools, Osceola County, which is the other county Valencia serves, Valencia and UCF into one database, and apply predictive analytics to, again, discover what are those patterns that some of you mentioned we're able to see some patterns when you put data. So one of the things that's very interesting to me as an educator is we all kind of wear these silos. I got this funny kind of metaphor, like when I was watching the Final Four. Unfortunately, the Jayhawks didn't make that. I'm a KU grad, but okay. But anyway, what if we expected people to play basketball with blinders on? It would be a totally ridiculous game, right? If you had no peripheral vision while playing the game. But as educators, we have no peripheral vision. We receive young students as freshmen. We don't know a whole lot. We maybe know a few data points from their high school graduation. We knew nothing about what their experiences were in elementary and middle. So it's really trying to unpack that and really open up and say, what can we do together? So those are some of the initiatives that we're working on.
Thank you, Joyce. Bridget, if you'll
Sure,
give us some highlights.
Thank you. A little about OCPS. You mentioned that we service over 203,000 students, and we are the 10th largest school district in the nation. Just an FYI, 67% of our kids qualify for free and reduced lunch, 67%. What you failed to mention, which is great, the Valencia UCF building that is going downtown is located, I call it the Paramore Cave because it's in the Paramore section of town. 100% of the kids will qualify for free and reduced lunch. So for those kids to be able to see Valencia and UCF in their backyard every day is powerful. That's what UCF and Valencia, that's the partnership that we have with them. Also, with OCPS, what we looked at is what are we not doing to ensure that our students are ready for Valencia and UCF? I'm a former principal of a Title I inner city high school, and I realized a lot of our kids were not taking the SAT and the ACT. So we pay for every 11th grader in Orange County Public Schools to take the SAT on the same day while they are in school, and for every 8th grader to take the PSAT. And we're able to share that information with Valencia and UCF and ask a very important question: what do we need to do to ensure that every kid is college and career ready? We even changed the name of our technical schools to Orlando Technical College. And we have a partnership with Valencia and UCF. At the end of the day, our goal is for our kids to end up at UCF, whether they go through Valencia or Orlando Technical or Westside Technical College. The goal is for our kids to end up at UCF. That's how powerful this partnership is. And I would just like to thank them for working with us. And once again, we meet monthly to discuss what can we do to ensure that every kid that walks across that stage is ready, prepped, and they're successful during the time they're at the Valencia and then UCF.
1 minute. So I try to bring a research perspective to everything that we do at UCF, at the Florida Center for Students with Unique Abilities, which is focused on developing college programs for kids with intellectual disabilities. I'm also here under the hat of the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. Two of my colleagues from UNC Charlotte are here as well, Lugina and Matt. So we look at trying to connect the science with the practice. And so you heard someone say earlier this morning that we know the science. We do know the science. And we know the science that helps predict success for kids that are in K-12 in terms of college and career readiness. So that's our challenge, is to connect that science with practice, both at K-12 and at post-secondary. And one of the things that we know in terms of kids with disabilities, all types of disabilities, is that career preparation, career education, and a number of probably 18 other things predict success in post-secondary education and employment. And so we know those things. The key is, how do we connect the two? And part of this is through individual education programs for students with disabilities. We look at across states, and we find that many states are developing the same kind of planning systems for kids without disabilities. And our goal is to make sure that post-secondary education in some form is in that educational transition plan for all students. And that's a major piece of making that connection.
And we appreciate your time, and we'll turn it back over to Joanna. Thank you.
I just wanted to tell you, we just rearranged a little bit. We just had such wonderful presentations, but we really want time for talk at the tables and for questions for all the groups. So we'll have lunch at 12, if I understood correctly. So we can now go for a good bit of the kind of talk I'm sure you are all dying to have, because I am. I've heard so many good stories this morning that fascinate me about different kinds of interactions, K-12 and university. So who's interested in asking a question?
I'd like to ask Ryan what kind of innovations he's doing at UCF.
Sure.
You have a
I will be as brief as possible. Again, I'm the director of the Center for Higher Education Innovation at UCF. The best part about that job is nobody knows what it does, and I get to make it up. But basically, we ask the questions not only are the students coming in, are they college ready, but is our institution student ready? That's a tough question to respond to at UCF, and we have to be innovative. You heard earlier, UCF is very competitive to get into. I didn't know before I arrived at UCF 2 years ago. It's a 48% admissions rate, average 4.0 GPA, 28 ACT. Good luck to most of our students. But those are our fall numbers. We have, I think, about 3,600 students that come in that look like that every fall. We have about 15,000 students that come in every year as transfers. They have very different backgrounds, and we have to design a university that is responsive to the needs of those very different groups of students. UCF has done it well so far. 89% retention rate, 70% graduation rates. Our students that come through Direct Connect graduate at the same rate as those students that have a 4.0 GPA coming in. And that's in the context of UCF growing from 20,000 to 64,000 over the past 20 years, and from 30,000 to 64,000 over the last 15 years. As Sissy mentioned, I go by Ryan because I'm not Southern, but as Sissy mentioned, our trademarked tagline is America's leading partnership university, and it's not just a trademark. These relationships show that. I also have the pleasure of working with Tim Rennick and with Fred Corey at ASU and the University Innovation Alliance, which is a consortium of 11 large public research universities that are committed to improving access, success, and completion for all students, in particular for low-income students. Some of how we innovate, we don't just read what Tim is doing in the Chronicle or what ASU is doing in the Chronicle. We talk regularly. Shocking in higher ed. We talk to each other. Tim and I are on a call with 9 other UIA liaisons every month, and those groups meet 3 or 4 times a year to share what we're doing. We work on strategies together to implement intrusive advising, to talk about the successes and challenges we're having with predictive analytics, and to move the needle forward. That partnership is really key with other institutions actually acting on it and not just giving a cursory, we went to a conference kind of thing. These are long-lasting, deep relationships that we've really worked on over the last few years. In addition to our work with the UIA, we're also, our center aims to take systematic responsibility for redesigning key university processes that are student-facing. So if you think about all of the things administrative, policy-wise, and organizationally that happen over time in your schools and institutions that aren't very friendly to students and that might make sense for administrators but don't make sense if you're the feet on the ground walking to go through them, we point those out at the university, and we use process mapping and design thinking to reimagine what that could look like, placing the student at the center of it. And that's hard at a place with very different kinds of students, but making sure that we are systematically redesigning those processes from financial aid to advising to make sure that our students have the easiest path to finding support and that we're designing with them in need rather than our jobs in need. And I will stop there.
Thanks very much. So what you saw us conferring, we're going to have some Q&A. We really mean that. And then we'd like you to work in your tables on the questions that are on the sheet. Really, what have you learned this morning? What can you take back? What's the similarities and differences between higher ed and K-12? What can everybody learn from each other? But first of all, questions, because I imagine you got some.
Thank you so much for all these presentations. So it's not surprising that UCF, Georgia State, and ASU are three of the most innovative universities, not just in partnering with high schools, but also in their own advising, course pathways, all sorts of things to increase success. So how come all of your peers aren't doing the same thing? And the reason I ask this is because many folks here will be in other communities where maybe their university is or isn't as responsive, or they're trying to wonder, how do I get this going? So I guess I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of what are the ways in which those processes or partnerships can be spurred on.
I'll take a first stab, a little contribution, and a lot of this comes from what we've borrowed from ASU, and that notion that ASU prides itself on who it includes rather than whom it excludes. That's not a virtue in higher education, typically. Prestige is the currency of higher
That's
education.
an example of conflict in accountability measures.
Right. And those are financial incentives from our states do that. Rankings do that. You know, your U.S. News isn't, few ranking systems really value inclusivity. And it has just been a decision of the leaders at our institutions that there's a responsibility to serve a broader number of students, and that by collaborating, you can do that. By collaborating, what's the UIA tagline? When universities collaborate, students win, I think is what we always say. And we mean that. But it's some of the reason that we're able to do that is strategic in design. We're in very different places. It's harder, it would be harder for most institutions to, it would be hard for Michigan and Michigan State to collaborate in the same way that we do, because they're competing for the same dollars and the same students. But I think that that strategic partnership, the way that the institutions are aligned, and most importantly, just the values of the leaders, and Tim can speak to that better than I do.
One other thing I'll mention very quickly is just the research, and this is connected to this group and why it's so important. You know, we have cultures that are hard to move, in part because we have faculty that tend to control a lot of the decision-making on our campuses. And what we found at Georgia State, by leading with the data, it actually opens up conversation, because while faculty come from very different perspectives, they all have been trained to, in one way or another, respect the data. That's often the starting point for a conversation. But the problem is we don't have enough data out there. Ryan, Fred and I are all working on a big $9 million federal grant where we're collecting data on the impact of predictive analytics on especially low-income and first-generation students over a 4-year period. But the reality is the federal What Works Clearinghouse has exactly one article in it about post-secondary academic advising. So we haven't done our work in getting the evidence out there that will then change the culture of teachers and faculty who are used to seeing things a particular way.
I'm just going to add one piece to that. Again, having worked with a collection of universities across the country at UCF and then at Western Michigan University, one of the challenges is, as Arizona State mentioned, and clearly UCF is seen in some ways, and at the Michigan universities big time, is that change from being the state university to calling ourselves a public university at Western Michigan University. And the reason for that was just because of this huge decline in state funding. And so you're struggling constantly with how do we make up that no increase, limit increase. The only way you can get an increase is by not increasing your tuition. And so that creates a struggle of coming up with what we might think are the resources needed to be innovative. So I think that's one thing to look at. Some of the things that we've been able to do at UCF, this center is one example, is $8 million pledged by the Florida legislature to start this center and programs at universities and colleges around the state. And we're clearly going to have to show the return on the buck economically, in terms of economic flexibility, output, in terms of jobs for folks. But that's an investment, and we've seen other investments in terms of our downtown campus, our research center on manufacturing, a number of things like that have come with investments from the state, and you don't necessarily see that happening in a lot of states. So I think that does contribute to the challenge of what need do we meet first?
Hi.
Fred, Chris, there are also, I just wanted to point out, there's some other higher ed people in the room. I hope you'll jump in. George Koo is one, City or Community College of Philadelphia. Phil Feldman from Alabama was at University of Southern Alabama. So lots of people may have opinions, and I hope you'll all jump in.
Hi there. My name is Joanne Henry, and I'm here from District of Columbia Public Schools. And actually, the last two comments, your comment and Tim's comment, get to what for me is almost less of a question for right now and more of a request, a public request for all those in the room who organize things like this, on a larger conversation later around the leadership and sort of the leadership strategies that you guys have learned. You mentioned what's happening with your state support of it. Just some of the questions I had about Georgia State, having worked a little bit with Georgia State many years ago. What are some of the leadership challenges and battles that you guys had in taking what you were learning was working and figuring out, here's the approach we need to take, and so now how do we actually get our own agencies to take it? And I love the theme here of asking, of looking at what's not working and saying, but let's look internally. What are we not doing, or what are we doing, or what are we doing to get in our own way, or what could we do to improve this? I just know that's such a much bigger conversation, and I know that we're mostly here to talk about what is working and like what can we learn about what's working and how we apply it, but the leadership conversation and the systemic leadership conversations about what did it take for you guys to then put in place what you did from a higher up point of view is really, that would be so amazing and so informative. So it's kind of whatever else you want to say about now is great, but it's like a larger request for a bigger conversation on that, because I think that's a whole other bucket of good stuff.
So that was terrific, by the way, everyone. Chris Mazzio, Education Northwest. I'm curious if I don't know who this is directed to, so anyone jump in. You know, so we've heard a lot in your kind of various presentations about the power of data. We heard a lot about partnership. You know, I guess I would be curious to hear more about who uses the data and how do they use the data, and sort of how does that work in that we have a lot of people, you know, maybe more than half of the room from K-12, and a lot of us focus on kind of helping people use data to improve student success. So can you give some examples of kind of who uses the data, how they use it to encourage kind of the outcomes that you kind of shared and talked about?
I can start, and I'm sure I'll let other people have ideas too. But one aspect of our Direct Connect to UCF initiative, the 11-year program that we've been into now, is the creation of an initiative around curriculum alignment. So about 8 years, 2 or 3 years into, I guess it's been 9 years now, so 2 or 3 years into it, we started, like, again, when you look at it from systems, what are the systems that you want to affect? And so curriculum, faculty engagement, as Tim mentioned, is important. And so we started getting disciplined faculty together from the university, from the college, and from the high school, looking at data on student success, talking about learning outcomes, talking about course learning outcomes, and building competency across those different curriculums. And they got into so we now have a full-fledged emphasis at the first number of fields that we mentioned were STEM related, so that where most the work is most mature in the STEM fields, but we're starting to add, we have a new group starting that's actually empowered through this downtown campus on writing and rhetoric and speech. And so, and that is looking at actual course completion rates and prerequisite course data, and how do those students transfer when they come into the university, how do they do in the subsequent course. And we actually have a curriculum. They meet throughout the year in their discipline groups, and then once a year we have a curriculum alignment conference where we all come together and talk about it and say what's worked. This year we did a survey before the conference to say, those of you who have been doing this, what difference has it made? Has it made any difference to the way you're teaching? Is in any way, are you seeing any lift? You know, this kind of thing. So, and those was positive. I mean, it wasn't earth-shattering, but it was a positive, bending towards a positive trend. So that's an example of bringing, I think that's what Tim was alluding to, like bringing the data to the people where they live and the things they care about. So that you've probably found the same thing with K-12.
One other example I wanted to offer is that with the district partnerships that we have, and incidentally just through our broader K-12 outreach efforts, we serve about 80,000 students and families annually. But through the course of developing these data sharing agreements with districts, as an example, in one high school, in our largest high school district in the state, they were using that data and came to ascertain that of all their freshman courses at the high school level, out of a set of 30 offerings, only about 7 of them were college going. And so they then decided that they needed to change that if they wanted to achieve certain outcomes. And over time, a fairly condensed period of time, I want to say 5 to 6 year period, they were traditionally known as a Voc Tech type of high school, and they wound up being the producer of the largest number of and percentage of college-going graduates, to the tune of like 60% of their graduates wound up going on to four-year university, and outperforming their district, which was at 19%. So that's just another example.
I would add, sorry, Tim's the expert here. I should defer to you.
I do want to make one point about the question about the advising. The advice I give is you're going to put 80 or 90% of your effort into the implementation of the data, not in the collection and the generation of the data. What we're spending on the analytics that we collect, and when newspaper reporters want to talk about it, they want to talk about all the analytics, is literally about 1/10 of what we're spending on the restructuring we had to do. We centralized advising, so when those alerts go off every morning, there would be somebody responsible for taking the alert and actually acting on it within 48 hours. We changed job descriptions of personnel on campus so that responsibility then would be enforceable and so forth. Those took far more energy and effort. And then the third thing that takes effort, so you need the analytics or the data, you need the personnel to use the data, but then you need the resources to direct students towards. So, it's great to know that an accounting student is struggling in the third week of the semester. The academic advisor who picks up that alert is not able to tutor that student in accounting. You need some resource then to dedicate to helping the students who have these challenges and problems. So we had 1,000 sections of courses at Georgia State this past year that had undergraduate peer tutors. We're taking students who succeed in the course one semester, paying them to sit in the same course the next semester so they get to know the new students and instructor, and to tutor the students, because that's a way we can scale that's reasonably affordable, because we can't afford to hire hundreds and hundreds of full-time professional tutors. But those are the things that we need to concentrate on, a little less on just getting the data.
I would add that if your data doesn't make it past your data office, you have a problem. And so, and I'll give an example of a failure we had at UCF that, like everyone else in higher ed, we were saying we have predictive analytics, but we weren't really using predictive analytics, and it took learning more about Georgia State's story to learn that we had really great data, but we didn't have it in an interface in a format that anybody beyond the walls of our data office could use. So we had to get a new system that was more usable for advisors and for faculty. So now we've rolled out a system, same one that Georgia State is using, that is much more advisor-friendly, but also data team-friendly. And we're piloting an experiment to see how we can encourage our faculty members to use it really creatively to redesign and reimagine their courses as well, to take it to the next step.
I want to come back to the leadership question back here. To have the experience at UCF, you had to talk the leadership at the institution into it, but you also had to talk leadership at other institutions over which you have no control other than persuasion. And I want to know how you did that. I want to know how you talk to the school board, how you talk to the city, the county, the state legislature, the governor's office, and what all those ingredients were. And to some extent, perhaps you could comment on what comes first. It's a chicken and egg kind of thing, you know. And I'd kind of like to know how that happened in Orange County.
In our area, it did happen through leadership. So actually, Direct Connect was born from the simultaneous brain power, as I mentioned, of Sandy Shugart and John Hitt. I mean, them getting together. So Bridget mentioned, we meet monthly. So I mean, talking to each other. I mean, it sounds silly. You had mentioned that too, Ryan. But leaders talking to one another. And then there was the reaching out to the school superintendents, who are also brilliant leaders in our area. So it's that idea of, and then, I'm a vice president. So in this 12 years that we've been on this, 11 years, I've been at the vice president level. So I mean, Dr. Hitt and Dr. Shugart, they don't work out any of the details. They say, this is a good idea, figure it out, So then at my level and at other, so it's all that stuff. Yeah. And another, example I'd pull from national movement is Achieving the Dream, which we've also been part of the Achieving the Dream movement, which is in a community college movement focusing on equity outcomes, and that's been around for about 15 years now. And the lessons learned from that, number one, is leadership at the top level. So, in the community college world, we're actually investing in that. The Aspen Institute has created an Aspen Institute for presidential candidates. And so it's a year-long study. They just finished the first year. The second year has been announcement. So we have recognized in the community college world a great need for leadership development, particularly at the presidential level. And we're investing in it. And I'm guessing that has happened, in all educational levels, probably the same thing. But it's through that, and I think data's part of it, and then commitment to let's make it happen, and then a charging, like you said, of the people who are actually going to do the work. So that's what we have found. And Ryan mentioned to me too, as a side comment, is get out of the competition, right? So we're all working for kids. We're all working for our communities. It's not about Valencia being, the grand poobah of the world. We don't care. We want our students to succeed. That's what we care about. So you have to find that too, because sometimes there's egos involved. You might have noticed that sometimes.
I just want to quickly comment, and then we'll take one last question. We've heard a lot of innovative things. We heard shared staff at the very top level from Fresno. We also heard that UC Merced was donating some of their staff and programming skills to the school district. Well, school districts are notoriously short for people. We heard that Georgia State was training peer mentors in massive numbers using a resource that is available on every campus, K-12 or higher ed. They're students who succeeded in one course already, and they're capable and competent, and they earn a little pocket money to boot, which does everybody good. So I think throughout the conversation there have been some threads, advising. And when we get into the afternoon session, which we'll do after lunch, we'll talk both about indicators and responses. And a lot of what you've been hearing essentially could be termed a response system, one way or the other. And so we'll take one last question, then some table talk. There are questions on the, at the top of the back side of the sheet. And then at 12, we'll break for lunch and come back an hour later. But first, Bridget from Kentucky.
Thank you, Joanna, and I'll be quick. This is a broader question that I think is part of achieving the vision that we're establishing. And while I think the supportive transitions between the traditional sectors is important, is anybody that's presented today, are you dealing with thinking about trying to collapse 11 through 14, grades 11 through 14, so that students are matriculating toward a credential that is marketable for them in the economy, and doing so without transition in the traditional way?
Have any early college people here?
Yeah.
Or dual enrollment?
That's just what comes to mind is we do a lot of dual enrollment, but I don't think that's what you're talking about, because that's pretty traditional as well. So we have about 2,500 students in dual enrollment every year. But.
Okay. One last,
That's, I think, part of what we're trying to build with the advent of our digital platform is certainly accelerating time to degree and really at the pace of the learner. I'm not sure if you were getting at something more specific than that, but that is effectively what we're trying to do in that context.
My name is Jaime Del Razo. I'm a researcher at the Annenberg Institute for School Reform at Brown University. Thank you to all the panelists and all the great work that you're doing at your individual campus. I think it was really great, too, that it was 4 different states. Gives you a nice flavor of what's happening at these different universities. I have a question for everybody, for all the 4 campuses. How are you dealing with the issue of undocumented students? I think we've heard about disaggregation across race. We've heard disaggregation across class. Immigrant status is a big issue, in particular matriculation into the university. And I'd be very interested to hear how you're all doing that. What gains are you making? What are some of the challenges? Especially because these states that are being represented here, California, Georgia, Florida, Arizona, have different policies regarding in-state tuition, regarding enrollment, barring of enrollment, and so I'm wondering how you're all dealing with that in trying to achieve what I think our vision is, which is making sure all students, as my colleague Angela Romans mentioned, all students meaning all students.
At Valencia, we admit all undocumented students, and we found a way to provide them all in-state tuition. Our state helped us with that. We were doing it before we had the legal authority to do it. I didn't say we were doing it illegally. I said we were doing. A couple of years ago, the state of Florida passed a rule that if basically the Dreamers, if the student is graduates with a Florida high school diploma and has attended for 3 years, we can give them the waiver that way. But we have found other ways to do it. And then we've also joined, again, in partnership with UCF, the scholarship program you might have heard of called thedream.us. So you have to commit to low tuition, and we have about 50 students. We just started last year, and we already have about 50 students who are on full scholarship that way. So we've just we've reached out through our different migrant community. We have a great outreach, Hope Community Center, that has a great outreach into the migrant community, and so we partner with them. So really getting the word out to undocumented is the hardest part, and in the current political climate, that's become more difficult, but we're up there. We haven't gone so far as to identify ourselves as a sanctuary campus, but we think of ourselves that way. We just haven't stuck our neck out quite that far.
I think Georgia may be the least friendly state of the 4 that are represented here. We actually have a state policy that restricts undocumented students from attendance at any public university that has competitive admissions. And so over a 2-year period, Georgia State, and this comes we talked about leadership a bit, right up to our president, Mark Becker, made a commitment to expand to accept every qualified student to Georgia State University. So now under state policy, we are allowed to admit undocumented students, and we're the only research university in the state of Georgia that's able to do so. But you talk about some of these issues at the top and the kind of commitment it takes. This was a multi-year commitment to, in some ways, sacrifice again our prestige on U.S. News and World Rankings and so forth to say if a student's college ready, we'll grow and we'll accept you. And then that by state policy allowed us, and there was some unhappiness about this in political circles, allowed us to begin to admit undocumented students.
So ASU's commitment to DACA students remains unequivocal. This in a very complex state environment that has many mixed messages going to our students who are living in families that don't have the documentation. We have a philanthropic partner who helps with tuition costs for DACA students. We remain a supportive environment for students who want to excel, and what we do for the students changes on a regular basis because the political climate changes. I think one of the hardest issues that we confront would be the emotional and psychological damage we're doing to young people and their families as they try to become well-educated. These are oftentimes incredibly bright, hardworking students who are being beaten down with a lot of negative rhetoric, and our job is to do the best we can to help those students overcome the economic, cultural, political, and psychological damage.
I think one can additionally comment that in California, there's a whole system of state grants, the Cal grants, which are available to documented and undocumented alike. That's a case where a very liberal state made the commitment themselves. But what you also find in California is a very large number of philanthropic organizations who work on counseling, essentially, one way or another, making the dream that college exists real for kids well before they get there. And I think you wanted one last one?
I'll just add ditto. I mean, I work for the Unified School District, so I'm not going to speak on behalf of the University of California. But our partnership with UC Merced, actually UC Merced actually has a full support program for DACA students. They actually have housing dedicated specifically for DACA students. California State University Fresno actually has a Dream Center and various supports as well. So as Joanna mentioned, I mean, in California, it's very much recognized as a major issue. Major institutions in the Central Valley, actually University of California Merced was set up specifically to target student populations that are large in the valley, undocumented students being one. And so there's very much a heightened awareness, a sense of all means all, and certainly a deep commitment to recognizing the social and emotional challenges of the students, and actually more importantly, recognizing the academic potential and dedicating resources to support them.
Okay, thank you. And let's give another round of applause